Recently, Selangor introduced new planning guidelines on non-Muslim places of worship. The rules included height limits and zoning restrictions. This controversial ruling caused public outrage and the plan was put on hold. But I'm glad to say that today those restrictions have been removed. Now at first glance, this is just policy making in action. But here's the uncomfortable question nobody is really asking. Why did those rules exist in the first place? Now imagine this, okay? You move into a new township, Bandar Baru. Everything looks planned. Everything looks modern. It's good. Wide roads, clean layout, nice parks, and a beautiful mosque. Purpose-built, large dome, clear presence. It looks like it belongs there. It feels permanent. And then somebody asks, where is the church? And you say, oh, the church, it's above the hardware shop. And some people may laugh or think this is a joke. But then you add, no, seriously, you go up the staircase, you go past the photocopy shop, you turn left after the bubble tea place, and if you see a tuition center, you've probably gone too far and you've missed the church shop lot. So now, before anyone reacts emotionally, this video is not an attack on mosques. Remember that, okay? Mosques are necessary. People need places of worship. That is not the question. The question is this: why do some places of worship look like they are part of a city's future, while others look like temporary spaces inside shoplots? As I said earlier, Selangor's planning guidelines on non-Muslim places of worship sparked controversy. Apparently, they were approved last year in November 2025, but these guidelines only came into public knowledge recently, in May, last May, 23rd May, just a month ago. There were height limits, zoning restrictions, access conditions, rules that appeared to treat different religious buildings differently. At first glance, this looks like urban planning. It's technical, administrative, neutral. But if you are somebody who's involved in designing any system, there is one simple principle that is observed, okay? What a system produces shows what it really prioritizes and not what it says it is trying to do. So the question becomes, what is this system producing? If this is purely about safety or traffic flow or engineering constraints, then the rules should be neutral. The rules should be applied evenly. But when one type of religious building becomes the reference point for another, we are no longer in neutral planning. We are in comparative symbolism, and symbolism is never neutral because it carries meaning. And here's the part nobody says out loud. Human beings do not argue about concrete, let's say, okay? They argue about what concrete represents. A mosque dome is not just a dome. A church steeple is not just a steeple. A temple tower is not just a tower. Because they represent identity, permanence, legitimacy, belonging, historical presence. So when people argue about height, they are not arguing about meters or feet and inches. They are arguing about meaning. Now here is a key distinction. Most communities do not just want permission to exist. That is the baseline. What they want is something deeper. They want visible confirmation that they belong. A government can grant legal freedom, but belonging is psychological. Belonging is spatial. It is visual. It is emotional. And it is reinforced by what people see around them. every day. Now, here is where things get interesting, because after public criticism, Selangor revised the guidelines. The height restrictions were removed, zoning rules were relaxed, and access requirements were eased. What was once presented as necessary structure has now become flexible. So let's think about this again. If these rules were purely technical, what changed? The roads didn't change, the physics didn't change, so what changed? The policy, the pressure, or the perception? So what does that tell us about how these rules were formed in the first place? You and I know that in multicultural societies like Malaysia, religious infrastructure is never just planning. It becomes identity signaling, political language, community reassurance, electoral sensitivity. And during politically sensitive periods, symbolic issues become amplified, not always by design, but because they matter deeply. So what are we really looking at? It is not simply inequality, it is not simply policy, but two overlapping human anxieties. One side fears, are we still secure? And the other side has similar fears, are we truly equal? And both fears reinforce each other. So at the deepest level, this is not about buildings, it is about signals. Cities communicate silently. Who is visible? Who is central? Who is permanent? Who is secondary? And people read those signals whether policymakers intended or not. Some of you may know that in Jakarta, the Istiqlal Mosque stands beside the Catholic Cathedral of St. Mary. Two major faiths, two major buildings, side by side, in full view of the city. The image is often used as a symbol of diversity and tolerance made visible in urban space. Now contrast that with how cities sometimes develop elsewhere, not necessarily through hostility, but through planning, zoning, and subtle structural separation. Because cities don't only reflect what a society allows, they reflect what a society makes visible and what it doesn't. So the question becomes, when we look at places of worship in Malaysia, are we seeing a shared landscape of belonging, or a landscape where belonging is structured differently depending on category? Now hold on to that thought, okay? Because this is where the discussion returns home. So perhaps the real question is not how tall a church should be, or where should a mosque be built, or whether zoning rules are technically correct. Perhaps the real question is this: what kind of Malaysia are we building through the spaces we create? A Malaysia where every community feels confidently rooted in the national landscape, or one where some communities are still quietly trying to understand whether they fully belong or not? Think about it. Freedom allows people to live in a country, but belonging is what makes them call it home. And if we cannot talk about this honestly right now, we will be forced to talk about it later when it is far harder to control. Thank you for listening. Speak to you soon. If you like my videos, please press like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please also visit my Patreon channel if you wish to sponsor me. Thank you.